Good morning to the whole of our Cranley Abu Dhabi community. I can't believe that somehow it's March. It feels like in many ways we're still back at the end of last term. Since we last spoke to you in February, we have seen some amazing changes going on in school as we've begun to open up and become more like a normal school. We've had football tournaments, we've had some amazing exam results from our seniors, we've had enrichment week where our students had the opportunities to come together and to play sports and do all the normal things that they would have done before we were faced with the global pandemic. It's also been really nice to see so many of your actual smiles on the crossing in the morning as we now move towards masks being off when we are not inside. So that's been really lovely to see, and to see so many of our children around campus and actually see their faces for the first time in nearly 2 years. We've also been saddened recently by events around the world, conflict around the world, and also with the sad death of one of our really well-loved parents in school. We have come together as a community, and I'd like to thank you all for that. And I also just want to remind you that at any point, if you or your children need any extra support, we are here as a community to do that. Your child has their tutor, the heads of year and housemasters, myself and Tori, and all of the people who work around your children are here at all times to support them. In exciting news, today's talk is, as always, brought to you by the Cranley Community Committee, and they are the parents who work tirelessly to support our community. We have got a raffle that's taking place, and it's been going on all last week, but I did just want to draw your attention to it. The prizes are amazing. I'm not just saying this. Spend a few minutes looking at what they are. There are staycations at top hotels. There are meals. There are spa days. There are dance classes, football classes, all sorts of things that you can win. Maroon 5 tickets, which I'm hoping to win. Apple Watch. The prizes are amazing, and the tickets are 60 dirhams for 3, I think, and it's well worth getting them in. You can drop the tickets off, you can drop the money off in an envelope. Instructions are on the newsletter, but do reach out to me if you're unsure about how to proceed. They will be drawing the raffle on Friday, the 18th of March. That's this Friday at 6:30 at Jumeirah Saadiyat Hotel. We'll be in the Lobster Lounge. And it was so nice last week to meet some of you face to face for our first parent coffee morning in person, again, since the pandemic started. It was really nice to put some faces to names, and we will be doing that again on Friday. So hopefully you can attend. You will need a 96-hour PCR test negative to attend, but hopefully we will see you there and we'll be able to connect some more in person. So what else has been going on? Thank you so much for all of your books that you donated. We had around 450 books donated from the community, and we have been working with a social enterprise group. One of our community members, 2 of our community members went to meet them last week, and we'll be donating book bundles to the refugee children through Basmat Amal, and we will be putting them together, and we will be donating them for the summer so that they have reading to do, and we'll be putting little mindful March bookmarks that our children are going to create as well. So thank you for that. But really, the purpose of what we're here today to do is to celebrate Mindful March. So this wasn't my initiative. This has been a tradition at Cranley for many years. And every March we come together and we celebrate mindfulness and we practice mindfulness. So when I looked at this and how we were going to mark the month with parents, I decided it'd be good to let you know as much as possible about what mindfulness really is. So we have invited along today one of the UAE's most eminent and leading speakers, writers and practitioners of mindfulness. Professor Justin Thomas is the chair of the psychology department at Zayed University. He is a chartered health psychologist with the British Psychological Society. He's a writer for the national newspaper and has written extensively in other publications and in books. And he's also a father, and he's a really, really good guy. So I'm delighted to introduce Professor Thomas, or I will just probably call him Justin for the rest of this call, in to meet with us today. So let me just let him into the call. Good morning, Justin. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you.
Good.
Real
It's
pleasure
so
to
nice
be
to
here.
have you here. Thank you. It's so nice to have you here. So, mindfulness. I mean, there's been so many books, and I know you'll talk about this. You've been and spoken to our senior students already last week to launch Mindful March. So thank you for that. But I'm going to hand over to you to talk to our parents about what it actually is. And I think the catchline, the byline for this talk was about the science behind it and the practicalities of it. And I know you don't just practice mindfulness. I know you are an expert in the why of it as well. So I will hand over to you. If any of our community would like to ask any questions, please do ask them on the chat. If you'd like to send me an email with a question, I will be checking that as well. My email address is there on my name. But I'm going to hand over to you, as I've said, the leading expert in this, so that you can talk to us a little bit more about what mindfulness actually is. Thank you,
Okay.
Justin.
Thank you, Liz. Really appreciate the kind words. I think what I'd like to do really as I start this is to invite the people who are listening to this to really listen. So very often when we stare at computer screens and we listen to talks or lectures or whatever, whatever it is that brings us to the screen, very often we will do that with a split mind. So the mind will be somewhere else rather than just kind of listening to what's being said. So it's an invitation. Obviously, you might be busy, you might have to multitask. But if you don't have to, I invite you to close down the other tabs, the other windows, put the phone to one side for a couple of minutes. I'm going to speak for about 20, 30 minutes. And really just to bring your attention to, sounds a little bit kind of give your attention to me, but to give your attention to this presentation really as best you can. And what you'll notice is as I speak, your mind will wander off, perhaps thinking about things you should be doing or could be doing. You might form opinions and judgments, and that's all perfectly acceptable. That's what minds do. And what we're asking here is to kind of just be aware when you notice your mind has wandered off, gently guide it back to the screen, to the talk, to the presentation, and just see if you can hold this talk in awareness for the duration of the session. So I'd like to start with Mindful March by poem. I think when anyone who's done any mindfulness, any like serious mindfulness courses will know that it's rich with poetry. And there's an idea behind that, in that poetry really often speaks to parts of us that are a little bit deeper, a little bit more connected to the body. Yeah, so there's an idea of poetry. Poetry starts with a lump in the throat, or the best poetry starts with a lump in the throat, or that sinking feeling in the gut. So some poetic person said that. So in terms of a poem, a single poem for me that encapsulates mindfulness, I'll choose a poem which is called Enough by David White. Enough. These few words are enough. And if not these words, this breath. And if not this breath, this sitting here, this opening up to a life that we've refused time and time again until now. Until now. So for me, that poem captures something of the essence of mindfulness. Yeah. And again, for some people that might seem strange. I know mindfulness is many things to many people. And part of that is connected to its popularity, which is a little bit of what I'm going to touch on today, how mindfulness has become so popular. And if you think about the popularity of mindfulness, anything that's particularly beneficial or useful often attracts commercialization and replication. So there's a lot of mindfulness flavored activity out there. And I call that mindfulness flavored activity without the, if you like, the real nutritional benefits that you can get from mindfulness. So it's really important, I think, to understand that there is false gold. Yeah. There's the word mindfulness has been popularized, and you can buy everything. You can get mindful socks, mindful coloring books, all kind. And I'm not dismissing any of that. Some of it might be quite useful or practical, but it's not the real deal. Yeah, much of it is not the real deal. And the reason why false gold exists is because there's such a thing as real gold that can be copied. I think what I want to do today is really dive down deep and look at the real goal, see if I can connect people to, if you like, the story of mindfulness, what mindfulness is, the actual practice of it, and how and why it's risen to prominence. And it's pretty much because it's incredibly useful. So in terms of its usefulness, I think, it's really hard to, the evidence is kind of unequivocal that there are huge benefits to be derived from mindfulness-based practices. If you look at the research literature, we can find across a lot of the kind of top tier journals, study after study, that kind of demonstrate how mindfulness practice is useful in the context of promoting better health. And it's not all subjective reports either. We can see there are several studies that look at physiological indicators, so cortisol levels, hormone levels, changes in brain activity, neural structure, etc., etc. Lots of evidence that really supports not MAC mindfulness, but the true practices, the evidence-based practices, such as MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. So again, trying to keep that in mind, that distinction between everything that calls itself mindfulness is not necessarily mindfulness. We have to really look at the authenticity of the programs that are being offered, and nowhere does that more rigorously than the academic research literature. So we see this even in terms of physiological indicators. And this study, few of these studies are really interested in terms of the context of the global pandemic. One of the findings, I'm not sure with the COVID vaccine, but with earlier vaccines, the H1N1 swine flu vaccine, there are studies that showed better immune responses to vaccination in people who'd practiced mindfulness, who'd taken an 8-week mindfulness course versus those who hadn't. So this idea of improved antibody responses to viral vaccines. So again, these are not things that are kind of fakeable or self-delusional. Often when we do something and we've enjoyed it, we'll say, yeah, feel great. So self-report stuff, which is valuable. But when we get down to actual biological, physiological measures of the outcomes of mindfulness, we still see real strong support for this. Okay, and it's not just in the domain of physical health or psychological health. We can see that mindfulness having a positive impact in diverse kind of contexts. So the Journal of Accident Analysis and Prevention, again, it kind of makes intuitive common sense. If a person is being more kind of, if you like, aware of their surroundings, aware, proprioceptively aware of what they're doing, aware of where they are, this idea of bringing focused attention to the moment, less likely to have accidents. So again, it's a bit of a no-brainer, but you can see that the researchers have gotten involved and actually tried to measure that. And you do find a reduction in accidents in people that have taken, again, bona fide mindfulness programs, things like mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. In terms of another area, another domain, often we kind of hear a lot of talk about innovation. And I think sometimes there's a kind of it's almost, what's the word for it? It's like a self-defeating exercise. People get all kind of stressed out about being innovative. We need to innovate. We need to be innovative. I think that the whole idea of that, when we're in a stressed out, anxious space, it's very difficult to be creative, especially divergent creativity, where we need that, if you like, that open, we need to open to the universe, open to life, open-minded. And again, these are all goals of bona fide mindfulness-based, I won't say goals, byproducts of bona fide mindfulness-based stress reduction programs. So again, this link with creativity, especially divergent creativity, like thinking outside of the box, thinking slightly differently. So you see this again in the literature, and it goes on. We could do a presentation just on the benefits, on the evidence-based benefits of MBSR. But that's not what we're here for today. What we're here for today really is to talk about the actual practice of mindfulness and why it's become so popular, the key reason why mindfulness has become so popular. Popular is the wrong word, but I'm going to use it because I can't think of a better one. It's pervaded the, if you like, it's become part of the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age. It's permeated the popular consciousness. Even people who haven't done it or wouldn't consider it have heard about it and suspect it's probably got some benefits, although not everybody agrees. But if we get to the heart of many matters comes back down to denarier, comes back down to cash. And in 1992, the World Bank commissioned a study, got together with the World Health Organization, and basically asked the question, how much does every illness cost us? And the idea here, if you like, was to help governments target interventions. What's costing your country the most? What's the best way to target the intervention to reduce that? So this is about, if you like, this is an exercise in economics, economic policy. And they asked the World Health Organization to, quantify how much does each illness cost us. And this is a famous study. It's being repeated again and again. It's called the Global Burden of Disease Study. The first iteration of it was around 1993. And when the numbers were crunched, the big surprise when they crunched these numbers, they invented a mobility adjusted living year. So that when they quantified how much illnesses cost us, and the big costs are things like lost work days, loss of productive people from the workplace, one of the biggest surprises was mental health, in particular depression. Depression came in at number 3, global burden of disability. Number 3 was depression. Nobody kind of saw that coming. It was a big surprise. It was one of the headlines of the first report. Coupled with the idea that depression was number 3, they crunched numbers. So they were doing clever statistical models looking to the future. And what they discovered back then in 1993, or what they projected or predicted back in 1993, was that by 2020, there's a nice sounding number to aim at. By 2020, they said depression will be the leading burden of disability globally. It'll be number 1. It was back even in 1993, 94, it was number 1 in many nations. And what the projections was that would be the global burden of disability by 2020. And they were wrong. They got it wrong, because depression became the global burden of disability 6 years earlier in 2014. Yeah. So global burden of disability is primarily because depression affects young people, and it's chronic, and it keeps them out of the workplace. And again, you can kind of look to other sources of evidence for this. So one of the other sources of evidence is the Health and Safety at Work Executive. So for example, in the UK, if you work sick for any significant amount of time, you need a doctor's note. The doctor's note is on a computer, and you can crunch those numbers quite easily. So you can find out what's the number 1 reason for people to be off work ill. And up until about 2014, the number 1 reason, what was it? Number 1 reason up until 2014 was the old bad back, the sore back, skeletal muscular problems. In 2014, though, we pivoted, we turned the corner, and number 1 became depression. It still is. So depression, stress-related illnesses became the #1 reason why people were out of the workplace in the UK. Data is the same for the US and probably for many other nations too, where you can collect this data easily. I go on, again, I don't want to go on too much in any one particular domain, but it's not just that, if you like, the burden associated, economic burden associated with depression isn't just to do with lost work days, it's also treatment costs. It's an incredibly expensive illness to treat. Mental health problems in general are, medications are expensive. Jan Scott published a paper in the British Journal of Psychiatry in 2002, which again across the NHS looked at drug spend on, if you like, hospital bed days and medication costs. And she compared depression with diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And the treatment costs for depression were more than cardiovascular disease and diabetes combined. So long story short, big driver here is cost. Yeah. And so governments globally kind of responded to this, and depression became a hot topic. We need to reduce the rates of depression. So people who were interested in depression, I was very interested in depression in the 90s. Research grants were abundant. You had to kind of search on, if you like, the most effective, efficacious interventions for depression. Antidepressants were being used, but the big problem with antidepressants seemed to be rates of relapse. People would get better on antidepressants, but they wouldn't stay better. And so they started to look at some of the other interventions. So, for example, cognitive behavior therapy was one that was looked at. People got better on cognitive behavior therapy, IPT, interpersonal therapy. People got better on IPT. And the conclusion was what they call the dodo bird effect. Yeah, everything works. Everybody's won. All shall have prizes. All of these things work. So the focus changed radically. Okay, if everything or most decent interventions work, placebo worked quite well too. If most things work, the important question is what keeps people well? And at the time, the best in terms of relapse prevention, so people get well and stay well for quite a long time, was CBT, cognitive behavior therapy. Although it was difficult to access that for everybody, not everybody wanted it. So they introduced the idea of maintenance antidepressants, keeping people on antidepressants for 5 years or longer, as long as was needed. The idea was to prevent the imminent relapse associated with depression. So CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, was shot to superstardom because it was by far the best. People learn skills. They learn, if you like, they learn ways to manage the future slings and arrows of outrageous misfortune. Skills, or if you like, knowledge that isn't acquired through antidepressant medication taking. So there were benefits that could be seen there. And this got people thinking, how can we make CBT even better? And how can we create something that's like CBT before you're depressed? CBT that stops you getting depressed in the first place. So again, the shift to prevention. And this is where mindfulness became a superstar. CBT worked really well as an intervention, and some researchers in the UK, Mark Williams, John Teasdale, they began to explore an intervention that had been used for pain management, primarily in the US, called mindfulness-based stress reduction, developed by a guy called John Kabat-Zinn in the late 1970s. They came together, these two things came together, CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, like the cognitive science of CBT and psychology, came together with something that was kind of rooted in the meditative traditions. So this idea of meditation, of attention training. If you think of meditation as training attention, these two things came together, and you have something, a hybrid, if you like, which is called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. So MBCT has been rigorously tested, and there's no intervention that prevents relapse in depression better than MBCT. So in the UK, for example, you have the National Institute of Clinical Excellence. They produce guidelines, nice guidelines, evidence-based guidelines, and the treatment of choice for anybody who's had at least 2 episodes of depression is to have MBCT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, because we know from the research it makes the chance of a third episode far less likely than anything else we can do. Solid evidence base that this is the best way to stop governments, and it's horrible to put it in financial terms, but it's the best way to stop governments from hemorrhaging cash. So this idea of MBCT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and other therapies started to, if you like, drink from the wisdom of mindfulness. So you have others like dialectical behavior therapy, ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, and the if you like, the core is mindfulness. We call these third wave behavior therapies, and the thing that differentiates them from the second wave is their connection to mindfulness. And this is this is the magic ingredient that helps these things be really, really powerful in terms of prophylaxis, prevention, relapse prevention. And where we really want to move towards is what we call primary prevention. We don't want someone to fall off and be in trouble. We don't want people to fall off the edge of the cliff before we rush the ambulances to see if we can save them. We want to stop them from falling off the cliff in the first place. So prevention, prevention, prevention. And that really is where this mindfulness thing picks up. I think as a side note, really, and this is a troubling side note. Many people talk about, the mental health crisis. Some people are still a little bit skeptical. They think, oh, well, it's just to do with people are more likely to report now, or they've lowered the bar for depression, they've lowered the diagnostic threshold. And those arguments are quite true. I think they do account for some of the increase. But even when you look at the sharp end, and the sharpest end, if you like, of mental health problems, particularly depression, is the hospitalization of children, for mental health problems, depression. Nobody hospitalizes a child based on over-reporting or a lowered threshold. And the numbers of hospitalized, so that there's growth in this area too, the sharp end of the spectrum. So the hospitalization of children for severe mental health problems has increased in the same context of this general rise in mental health problems. So it's real. At the very, very sharp end of the spectrum, you can see in some nations an increase in child and adolescent suicides. So, for example, the Ministry of Education in Japan in 2020 reported the highest rate of child suicide since records began. Highest rate, 2020. I don't know the data for 2021 yet, but in Japan, the number one cause of death for people between the age of 10 and 14 is suicide. The mental health crisis is real. And prevention. Mindfulness, MBSR, is that prevention. Mindfulness is the evidence suggests it's the best at relapse prevention, and it's the best way, if you like, we can future-proof our children from the outrageous slings and arrows of misfortune. And it's not the only focus. Go back to the beginning of the presentation: more creativity, better well-being, better relationships, more attentive to surroundings, less likely. The list of benefits is endless. It's huge and it's endless. And this is why I really push mindfulness in my institution, in my daily life. It's something that is a really, really valuable gift to society. I'm going to say a little bit about how it works, and then hopefully we can do a practice together, a very brief practice together, because again, like I said at the beginning, to really get the benefits of mindfulness, it's not about a quick fix or a dip in. We really need to kind of give it some attention, some focus. And to get the benefits that I'm talking about the benefits that are derived from structured programs that take a little bit of time commitment, probably 8 weeks, 2 hours a week for 8 weeks. And then, the whole idea is that you develop a personal practice that becomes part of your life, like maintenance antidepressant medication, but without the side effects. It's a lifestyle change. Okay, so listen, at the heart of most mindfulness training is this idea of reacting versus responding. So there's lots of benefits that are derived from this, but this is, if you like, a little bit of the cognitive science in a nutshell. So if we think about an event, an unpleasant event, now you can do this with pleasant events too, but I'm going to focus on unpleasant events. And these unpleasant events could be what we call psychic realities. It could be a psychological event. It could be a thought. Yeah? A particular thought hits you and boom. But let's just keep it out in the world. Unpleasant event. As soon as we notice something, there's what we call apperception. Yeah? Our history, our memory, our things that have happened to us in the past, they colour the way in which it's perceived. So there's an apperception. So something unpleasant has happened. Apperception kicks in. Apperception triggers body sensations. We feel it in the body, the lump in the throat, the balled up fists, that sinking feeling in the stomach. These are the dramatic ones, but there are much more subtle ones, the clenched teeth, that kind of thing. They're all triggered by our apperception. There needs to be some perception first. We need to notice something. And we know particularly that our perception of things is coloured by, what's happened in the past to us, or if you like, our personal story colours the way we drink in the present moment. Okay, so those bodily sensations give rise to feelings. We could call them emotions. It's an affective response. Yeah, we might be able to label those feelings: rage, anxiety, dysphoria. We don't have enough words for the amount of feelings we feel, but these bodily sensations give rise to feelings, and then we can go in two different ways. And so this is where mindfulness kicks in. Our default setting, if you like, our OS, our operating system for the human evolutionary inheritance, is reactive. Yeah, we fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Yeah, we've kind of got a natural reactivity built in because it's useful. It saves our lives in certain circumstances. And once we get into once these things are triggered, we go into what's called doing mode. Now, doing mode isn't bad. We need to get things done. In MBCT, we talk about driven doing mode. And the idea here is we're trying to fix something that can't be fixed. Yeah. If you think our problems in the evolutionary past were generally things we could fix, or we could run away from. Many of the problems we face in the modern world aren't. We can't just pull out a club and fix it that way, or we'll go to prison. And some of these more subtle social problems, you can't fix them by doing things. You just can't. You make them worse. And people get locked into driven doing mode. This can give rise to what we call elaboration, thinking about it constantly. Us overthinking is us trying to find a fix for something that can't be fixed. It's kind of like trying to scream yourself to sleep. It's not the way to go. It can also lead to what we call avoidance. So we just kind of run away. It's flight, isn't it? We run away from it habitually, maybe. We just keep away from it. Reality never gets tested. So this is all connected to driven doing. And you can easily connect this type of stuff to damaged relationships, mental health problems, substance abuse. The difficulty is that not always. Sometimes reacting is useful. So there's an edge here, and this is what we're trying to work in mindfulness. So if we go onto the green side, this is where mindfulness aims to help us cultivate. We use a different part of the brain, the left prefrontal cortex, and we're trying to switch into being mode, being with. So the feelings are there: disgust, aversion, anger, whatever it is. We want to sit with it. It doesn't mean we've become bovine and passive and we're never going to do anything at all. No, but we sit with it. We may be curious about it. What does this anxiety really feel like? Whereabout is it in my body? We might move counterintuitively. We might move back upwards. We might go from the feelings to focus on the body. Where do I feel this anger? Oh, it's in my fists. Oh, it's in my jaw. We might even end all the way back up at apperception. kind of ideas about our learning history, and that might give us some insights moving that far back up. But even if we don't move up, we sit with, this sitting here, this opening up, this opening up to whatever's here, whether it's uncomfortable or not. We're not fighting, we're not flighting, we're not fixing, we're not elaborating, the inner narrative. We're just going to sit with it as best we can. Not easy to say, difficult to do. That's why it takes practice. Eventually, though, what that will lead to, hopefully what that leads to, rather than a reaction, it leads to a mindful response. So again, the cliche is you do nothing. No. You might choose not to act, but choosing not to act is not the same as doing nothing. That's a choice, and that's incredibly empowering. We refer to that as masterly inactivity. It's not the passive doing nothing, the avoidance doing nothing, the passive aggressive doing nothing. Sometimes inactivity. But the idea here behind mindful responding is typically approach orientated. We move towards, not away from. We move towards left prefrontal cortex, approach to a love set, compassion, kindness, curiosity, and hopefully every now and again we'll get insights which will lead to critical wisdom. And we'll preserve our relationships. We grow through adversity, and we recover. We bounce back quicker. We don't get locked in these endless elaboration loops, this ruminative, depressogenic thinking patterns. We've exited that, and we've moved somewhere else. Some people say don't overthink. Overthinking isn't the issue. It's underfeeling. We need to move towards the being mode, and to be able to sit with those uncomfortable feelings at least long enough to be able to mindfully respond. And very often the best response, the wisest response, is inactivity, but not always. Okay, I'm going to finish up. We talked about driven doing, and this is doing is useful. We praise people, don't we? We praise our children for getting stuff done. He's a doer, he's a mover and shaker. Look at me, I'm a multitasker. Like, our society glamorizes that. We celebrate it. We have the to-do list. We don't have a to-be list, do we? How would you like to be today? But we have these to-do lists. Very often we're quite driven. We're in this driven doing mode. It's a hallmark of our age. And it's not always the healthiest thing. It can take us away from being able to see the big picture. It gets us locked into fixing and doing, when sometimes the wisest response is to be. Not always, and this is why it's a struggle. This is why it's a struggle. It's not a prescription. This is something that needs to be slowly experienced. It's not a quick fix. That's Mac mindfulness, not that helpful. This is something that really needs an investment of time to experience, and if you like, kind of work the edge between doing and being, knowing when being is probably going to be the more healthy, effective way to respond. When to do and not to do, and stop. I think to stop, if you like, celebrating, hyperactivity. We do in our society. We often celebrate hyperactivity and overachievement. At the cost. At a cost. There's a real cost. There's a negative side to that too. And so I'll finish with a poem. I think this is a poem because we're parents and we have children. And again, it's a poem which, again, you'll find in several of the mindfulness courses, because poems summarize a lot of what's been said into a few short words. So, do not ask your children to strive for extraordinary lives. Striving may seem admirable, but it is the way of foolishness. Help them instead to find the wonder and the marvel of an ordinary life. Show them the joy of tasting tomatoes, apples, and pears. Show them how to cry when pets and people die. Show them the infinite pleasure in the touch of a hand, and make the ordinary come to life. Make the ordinary come alive for them. The extraordinary will take care of itself. Okay, I think before we finish, we've got a couple of minutes left just before we go to Q&A. I'll leave you with a quote from the, if you like, the author, the founder of, seems a strange word, both seem strange words, of mindfulness, because lots of these traditions go back thousands of years. But Jon Kabat-Zinn, if you like, who's credited as the founder of, and he is the founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction. Again, one of the evidence-based approaches to mindfulness. He says, don't wait until you're about to jump out of an aeroplane to weave your parachute. Weave your parachute before you jump out of the aeroplane. And the idea here is, very often we're reactive. We wait for bad stuff to happen, and then we kind of get interested in mindfulness and, well-being, promoting type activities. This is something that we do. The time that we spend meditating, mindful eating, mindful walking, mindful listening. Did you listen to me mindfully? These are all practices. These are all practices for when, to a resource to be drawn on when things, inevitably do go belly up, and they will go belly up for all of us at various times in our lives. So I invite you just for a couple of minutes, just to, if you feel okay to do so, to allow your eyes to gently close, if that's okay for you, if you're in a place where you can do that, and to feel your feet on the floor, just a sense of where the feet make connection with the ground, and perhaps noticing where your hands are right now. Uncross. If you can allow the hands to open, let them rest down on the legs or by the side, and just open up. Perhaps notice your posture. A sense of being supported by the chair or whatever it is you're sitting on. Just becoming aware of that support. And the weight of the body, gravity doing its job, the weight of the body falling downwards towards the earth, and the spine and the neck rising up out of the chair. Sensing how that feels to just sit here. And then perhaps, if it's okay, noticing the breath, not to breathe in any special way, but just be curious about this breath that keeps us alive, keeps us connected to the earth. This in-breath, this out-breath. A sense of rising up on the in-breath. And a sense of gently letting go on the out-breath. And of course, the mind will wander off. Things you should be doing, things you might be doing, things you did. That's fine. It's not doing anything wrong. That's what minds do. But just allow that to let go of that and bring your awareness, your attention back into the body, back into the next in-breath, the next out-breath. Enough. These few words are enough. And if not these words, this breath, and if not this breath, this sitting here, this opening up to a life that we've refused time and time again until now. Until now. And as we end this practice, perhaps just if the eyes have been closed, allowing them to open and giving yourself whatever you need, a stretch, a yawn, and bringing our attention back into the session. And we open up for, I think we're ready to open up for any questions if there are some. But thank you again for your attention. And yeah, I needed that actually. That was a nice way for me to start my day at the end. Yeah.
I have to say, Justin, me too. And thank you so much for that. I feel I did join in with you then. And I hope people who are watching now, or people who, watch this asynchronously later, really do just take that moment, because it's so profound, and it's that your mind just wanders, doesn't it? To just be able to pull it back to now is so powerful and so important. Thank you for that. That was, I've read books on mindfulness, I've listened to you talk before, but that really, in a really short session, but just really pulled together why this matters, and as parents as well, why this matters, which I think some of our questions are going to focus on as well, is how we can help our children with this. So I'm just gonna have a quick look, because I've got quite a few different ones to go. Yeah, someone's loved the Mac mindfulness. One of the questions, our children are under immense pressure. We're going back now. We've had amazing exam results. Real assessments are happening again. It seems really difficult to encourage them to be mindful while that's also going on. How do we balance that?
So this whole idea of the pressure that I think children, young people are under, is something that we create that, don't we? We create that pressure. If I don't like to say that, I feel like I'm beating myself up a little bit, but I think, okay, we create that pressure. We can alleviate that pressure. Yeah. And I think it's really good to achieve. It's really nice when things go well. It's really nice to win. It's really nice to kind of have accolades and, kind of receive applause and all the rest of it. But I just think we need to allow that to be a byproduct. Yeah. Again, how to do this is the difficult thing, but I think we can, within your own sphere of influence, within your own family, with your own children, you can celebrate victories and, talk about, I often will talk them down into kind of victory and amazing results kind of, but did you enjoy it? What did you learn from it? How was it? Like, what was that like? Being curious about the experience and not just overly fixated on results. I think the poem says it more eloquently than I ever could. Do you know what I mean? Kind of giving as much attention to eating a pear as you would to discussing grades on an exam. I'm not dismissing, I'm not saying it's not important. It is important. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not as important as other things. And I think just coming back to that with children, you have to, as the parent, though, you have to embody that. We have to embody that. Yeah. I mean, if we had more time, but one of the big things about mindfulness is if you train to be a mindfulness instructor, it's all about embodiment. Like, you can't give what you haven't got. Yeah. So again, I think with if we want children to be able to disengage from unhelpful pressure, we need to have that ability ourselves. Can we disengage from unhelpful pressure? Are we able to do that? And I think that, again, mindfulness allows you to notice when you are reacting to pressure, and for you to think about whether that's, a healthy space to be in. Sorry, long answer, but it's a huge question.
It's a great answer.
Yeah,
And our children, Yeah, they're faced with that, and also the constant scrolling, social media. I know it's something you talked about in the assembly with the students as well. It's really difficult for them to switch off. We've almost put them in this position during the pandemic where they're on screen, they're online. It's constant notifications and things going on for them as well. And I do think that adds such a different pressure than we grew up with, where we went and played outside, and could just do that. A lot of their time is focused online. Have you noticed that there's been a shift away from mindfulness? I mean, there are apps online. Are there any that we'd recommend for our children or for us? Or is that mindfulness?
Yeah, I think I'd say, I mean, again, I was accentuating the distinction. I think lots of these apps online are useful and helpful. Some of them are, they're not harmful. But it's not downloading a mindfulness app don't expect it to give you the benefits that have, the evidence, the benefits we talk about are based on evidence from particular structured programs. So you're not going to get those benefits from listening to an app occasionally. It's not the same thing. So I'm not saying it's harmful. It might be, and there might be some benefits to it for many people. So, but it's not the same thing. And I think the whole issue of digital well-being and online, it's to some extent, it's a very similar answer. I think children are naturally mindful and curious and can spend hours looking at shadows on the ceiling, and we'll ask you these amazing questions that you've walked past a plant a million times, and the child will look at it through the gaze of this childlike curiosity. So children have got this natural mindfulness, attentiveness to the world around them. And I think what they do, they imitate us. Yeah, they imitate us. It's a different age, but when lots of people used to smoke, in the olden days, children used to get the sweet pretend cigarettes. They put the pens in their mouth and they do that. And it's the same thing. The children see the loving gaze of their father or mother staring at the little screen and laughing, and they see the pleasure and connection that this role model has to this thing. And of course, they're going to want the same. They're going to want that same thing. So again, we can't complain about screen time unless we embody digital well-being. And it's even more harmful. If we're over the age of 25, we have a fully developed prefrontal cortex. Those children, they don't have the attentional resources. They don't have the executive function that we have to be able to kind of switch our attention when needed. So I think this is, again, another one of the urgent calls to action for our age, is this idea of the impact that many of the technologies are having on people's ability to focus and pay attention. Yeah. And it's, again, our ability to focus and pay attention is extremely important, again, for our mental health. People often talk about overthinking. People will say, stop overthinking. Like, it's like if someone is drowning, if someone falls into the river and you shout, stop drowning, like, that's not going to help. Is it telling someone to stop overthinking is not going to help at all. People need to be able to move their attention around, to let go of thoughts and move their attention somewhere else. And like anything, that takes practice. That is the weaving of the parachute. Again, so this is why mindfulness is incredibly important for the attentional development of attentional resources that we'll need. And again, this need is even greater in the information age, where we're bombarded with information, and where maybe we'll struggle to know what to pay attention to. We'll have 16 tabs open, be listening to music and be revising for our history GCSE. that is not a reflection of my household, by the way.
I've been to your house, and I'm pretty sure that that goes on, because you have teenagers as well. So I know you live in this exam time as well. Just a quick more couple of questions. One of them is a really interesting question, actually, about that space and the response that you talked about. Sometimes when a child, or even us as adults, don't respond, it can be viewed that they're sulking or being passive aggressive. Or how can we communicate that actually we're just taking time to be, without getting drawn into an argument? If your children are pushing you over the edge and you just stop, how can you communicate that? Or how can we tell our children, if they are feeling, that they need that time to develop it? What can they say while they're taking that moment?
Yeah, I think this is part of, if you like, a lifestyle change. So mindfulness, session 8 of MBSR is all about how do we carry this on. So mindfulness is not going to work if you just do the 8-week course and then never practice anything again. Of course, it's not going to work. So if you've taken an MBSR course, generally people in your family will have seen you with your eyes. Like my kids laugh at me, or what you sitting practice. You need to practice sitting. What's wrong with you? But after the laughter subsides, it becomes part of just what you do. People understand that. People understand that occasionally you take yourself off to just sit down, lie down, and be with your body, your thoughts, your feelings, the universe, that it just becomes part of what you do. I'm trying to think of some of the little sayings that have crept in, but I think everyone will manage that slightly differently. But I think, it's the first couple of times you do it might seem odd. And when you're on a mindfulness course with people, you're encouraging them to practice this. And what you do, we've got habitual ways that we respond. When people push our buttons, there's habitual ways we respond. And what mindfulness is encouraging here, habitual ways we react. What mindfulness is encouraging is experimentation with alternative responses. And most of the times our buttons are pushed, it's usually in a relational context. Someone is pushing our buttons. So just by responding in a different way, normally when I push your buttons, you come back at me. And so today I'm not coming back at you. I'm just going to say, listen, I'm going to think about that for a little bit. Okay. That can be like, you've never said that before. You've never done that before. That really signals a pivot. That signals a change. That's you, if you like, transitioning, becoming more cognitively flexible. Again, these are goals from mindfulness, different ways of responding. If you always do what you've always done, you always get the same results. We call that personality. And sometimes, people's relationships are enhanced because they've inculcated some of these, if you like, new and different ways of responding. And that slowly, again, in the context of a family, that's going to filter in and show up in different ways. People have different ways of signaling that they need that space, but it becomes a thing. In many households, it's not a thing. There's just a habitual way of reacting to conflict.
And it's not always healthy. That's the thing, isn't it? So I'll be practicing that tonight. When Stanley's pushing my buttons, I'll be practicing taking that time to respond. We are out of time, and I'm really sorry. We do have a couple more questions, and I will be asking you just in after this, just a couple of these that we can get back to some of our parents. Last question. If our parents want to know more about this, if they want to do some of these courses, how can we connect them to more mindfulness resources? Or are there courses in the UAE that they can do? Can we get you in to do one? Putting you on the spot there.
To be honest, I'm always up for doing this, and I do them regularly. I have a capacity to deliver 8-week MBSR. 8-week, I'm trained to do 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is a wonderful program for many people. They're huge. It's one of the evidence-based programs. But again, finite capacity, but there are not a lot in the UAE. There are not a lot of teachers, but they're increasing. The number is increasing. But you can also now, because since we went online, there are some online offerings, and Oxford University, the Oxford Mindfulness Programme, they offer 8-week MBSR courses online. There's the Mindfulness Network from Bangor University, connected to Bangor University. Again, they offer the 8-week MBSR. And I think to get the real deal, it's just important to know that your instructor is a teacher, has got teacher training qualifications in MBSR or MBCT, and or also connect with a reputable institution, because there is a lot of snake oil salespeople out there doing, and again, I'm not knocking, because some of it might be beneficial or helpful, but you just don't know. Do you know what I mean? You don't really know what you're getting. It's not if you like, the authentic, evidence-based program, unless, the person is claiming that it is. It's mindfulness-based stress reduction or MBCT. So I think the best way to find a good program is to look at the credential. All good programs will project the credentials of the instructors. And I think using is another safeguard. So Oxford is a good one, and the Mindfulness Network, and they're offering programs online. So one way to go.
Perfect, thank you. And hopefully we will be able to get you into work with our staff and our parents. And if anyone is interested in running these sessions in school, hopefully as restrictions open up, we can start getting that in.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I'd welcome the opportunity to work with parents, staff, and with the staff in the school. I think school is a great place to locate this. And people often talk about doing it with children. I'm okay with children. Maybe it's not as important to do it with children for reasons I discussed. There's a natural mindfulness there. The PFC, the PF Chang, the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed yet. But if parents and educators embody mindfulness, that's the best for the children. Will imbibe that. They'll pick up on that as a byproduct. Definitely, it's the way to go.
Thank you. And we have been doing some mindfulness every day. This week, we'll be doing it next week and the week after in school with the children, taking time to listen. Your idea of, getting them out and doing a few mindful marches, looking at senses, grounding, all sorts of things as well. So thank you to all of the staff out there who are working on that. And thank you, Justin, so much for coming to speak to us today. I've really, really enjoyed it. I know I'm sure we've all taken a lot from it, and to the whole Cranley community, thank you for listening, and we'll see you again on our next talk. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.